I mean, it was better, but than yesterday.
All right, welcome everybody. So as people get logged in, everyone have their glass, raise their glass.
What are we what are we drinking?
We're drinking, it's all in the end, we're drinking the ETA.
ETA, all right, excellent. I'll go open it up.
Okay, a couple more people are coming in.
Subject to Change Wine Company.
Subject to change.
ETA.
ETA question mark.
All right, we got a young toaster.
That was a young, some nice kid. All right, everyone's there, so let's get started. So raise your glass, and how for the new people here, we cheers by clink your camera first. That's how we're doing our virtual cheers. And
Cheers. Thank you. Randall.
salud, or chin chin, as they say. So let's start first with our new guest, with Daniel's guest. What are you tasting when you drink this?
Yeah, it's spritzy.
Effervescence.
Yeah.
Spritzy and effervescent. Love it.
So very summery, don't you think?
Yeah, perfect for the weather today. Nice pairing.
Yeah. Very hot in parts of California. Stephanie, what are you picking up on this? You're on mute.
Hi. Sorry, I'm just jumping in here. It's we actually had some of this yesterday too, and I found it very savory for a rosé.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
Anybody else like to share what they're tasting?
Very glue. I could drink a lot of this, I think.
So you can always order more directly from it.
Hey guys.
Great.
Hey, Brian, we've done the cheers already. We're just comparing some tasting notes. We've heard people say it was spritzy, summery, savory. They can drink a lot of it. What do you get? Is it me or just a bunch of people's screens seem to be freezing?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Looks good on mine.
All right. So, Summer, what are you getting on yours?
A little bit of grapefruit, citrus.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm getting a little.
You guys hear me?
They're outside too.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, we can hear you, Brian. Okay, so sounds like a couple people are having some internet problems, but let's just turn it over to Alex. Alex, tell us a little bit about this wine.
Cool, thanks, Chris. Thanks everybody for showing up on your Sunday evening to hang with us via Zoom. So yeah, I guess a little bit about the wine. I guess I'll start off by just saying like a couple people called out like that they felt this wine was like spritzy and savory.
Yeah, video. Join with video. I mean, join with computer.
All right.
Kind of just a quick update on why you might be picking up on those things. So this wine was bottled with a small amount of residual sugar. Not something that we're always afraid of doing. Generally speaking, like conventionally speaking, if you're gonna bottle a wine with residual sugar, which like a massive amount of wines, especially commercial wines, are bottled with residual sugar, you would, like the textbook would say, that you'd want to sterile filter those wines and hit them.
Hey, Alex, you're a little hard to hear. I don't know if everybody else is having a hard time hearing him.
Oh, is this better? Like, should I get close?
That's a little better. Yeah.
I'll put headphones in. Can you hear me, Chris?
I can hear you. It's faint though.
Oh shit! Sorry. Is everybody having the same issue?
Raise your hand if you're having a hard time hearing him.
Oh wow. Well, that's everybody. That's not good.
Hear you.
We
Okay.
can hear you.
We can hear you. Okay. Can't hear you over the crunching of the nuts, though. But otherwise, you sound fine.
I'm gonna try to just pair my headphones up and see if that might.
All right. Yeah, we got a big group today. A lot of people coming
Love
in.
Alex, where are you? Just to start, curious where you are besides your wine cellar or wine tasting.
You are using the computer audio.
I'm in a wine shop.
Where in the world?
Oh, in San Francisco.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, I'm hanging out at
So
Gemini Bottle.
Alex is probably calling from Gemini Bottle in the Mission in San Francisco.
That is correct. Is the sound better now? I have headphones
That's
in.
perfect. Yeah, much better.
Oh, sweet. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I am at a bottle shop in San Francisco called Gemini. Just having a little end of day rosé with you all. So yeah. Oh, so what I was saying was the reason that this wine has a kiss of spritz, which a lot of people pick up in natural wine, is like high amounts of dissolved CO2, even in still wines, meaning like they're not designed to be sparkling wines, is that it's to have like a true zero amount of sugar in wine is not something that always happens, especially if you're bottling early, which is something that we tend to do. We tend to bottle wines like when they're really fresh, because that feeds back really nicely into the rest of our style choices. So with that comes, all of our wines are what's known as 0-0. So nothing added, nothing taken away, strictly organic fruit, organic practices in the vineyards. And so, yeah, this wine went to bottle with about 2 grams per liter of residual sugar, which is a very, very, very small amount of sugar in the grand scheme of anything, but even in the grand scheme of wine. If you think about what 2 grams of like granulated sugar looks like, it's like a pinch, in a well, this isn't a full liter, but in 3/4 of a liter, it's like nothing. But ultimately, if you don't sterile filter and hit a wine with sulfur, which is an antimicrobial, to remove the yeast's ability to continue fermentation, you can get like some fermentation happening in the bottle. We don't really shy away from that. Obviously, there are levels at which that's okay and levels at which it's not. So like if you bottled with 10 grams of residual sugar and that re-fermented in the bottle, it would push the cork out. So that would obviously be a disaster. But like at 2 grams, you just get this nice spritz that by the end of the bottle, you'll probably notice, depending on how fast you drink your bottle, it might be gone, but that CO2 does help protect the wine from oxygen, which is something that, again, like the textbook would say use sulfur to protect your wine from oxygen. But CO2 is a much nicer, friendlier way to protect the wine. So that's kind of where you're getting that little spritz from. Even if you just like swirl your glass, it's such a small amount of dissolved CO2 that even if you like vigorously swirl, it'll go away. I happen to love it just because it lifts the wine up. I love it in most wines, just because I find it to give like a little extra snappiness, which is always welcome for me. And I also heard some people say that they find the wine savory, which I also find like a savory undertone in this wine, which is otherwise like people think about rosé as this like fresh, fruity, kind of easy drinking thing, which this wine definitely is. But I do have like, I am proud that this wine has like some more depth with sort of like that savory level. Can you guys still hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. So
okay.
let's start with Alex. What grapes are in this wine?
So it's 60% Zinfandel and 40% Carignan. And so this came from a vineyard. The Carignan was planted in the 60s. The Zin was planted in the 80s. This is in Redwood Valley, so we're talking about kind of the northern end of Mendocino County, east of the 101. You're talking about like a really hot, dry climate. What makes this area great for these varieties is the varieties handle the heat really well, the daytime heat really well. They're not fragile to that. But this area cools down a lot at night, and that allows the fruit to retain natural acidity, which is really important in all wine, but it's particularly important in natural wine, and it's particularly important in rosés and wines in this style, because acidity is what gives the wine like freshness and energy, but it also acts as a preservative. And so, So,
Hey, Alex, Danielle has a question, and I know this is relevant because more than one person asked me about this today. Danielle, what's your question?
Randall, you want to ask it?
It's actually my question, it's Randall. No, I was just wondering what's behind the name of the winery and the wine. Subject to Change Wine Company and ETA ?
Yeah, because before you answer that, they're going to say, so more than one person did not know what wine we were drinking tonight because they thought it was a hold date and it was subject to change for something else, which is why it's a really good question. So Alex, go ahead.
That happens a lot. Yeah, there are continuous issues with the name of the winery being such a like a ubiquitous phrase, and so yes, it is quite challenging on a regular basis, but hopefully memorable enough that it won't be mistaken again, and hopefully the Subject to Change Wine Co. also is a little signal. But basically, we started the wine in 2017. At the time, I had a couple of business partners, and we were trying to figure out what to name the winery, and that actually turned out to be a greater challenge than we had ever imagined, just due to the huge amount of names that were already taken, and just how hard it is to like give an identity to something before you really know what it is. And so, we had just finished our first harvest, and the wines were still like, they weren't even finished wines. They were all in tanks and barrels. And but we were, kind of working on the marketing and branding and packaging and getting ready to bottle and release our first offering. And basically, I was just on a call, and I said, you know what, we're just going to have to come up with really simple packaging, and it will be like sort of non-committal in terms of aesthetic, and the name will just have to be Subject to Change. And he's like, oh, what a great idea. And I'm like, what's a great idea? And he's like, call it Subject to Change. And I thought what I was saying was we would name it like whatever, like Wine Glass Wine Company, or like Pen Cellars or whatever, and it would be Subject to Change. But he thought I meant call it Subject to Change, and so it spawned out of like a miscommunication. And our initial packaging looked like this, which was really non-committal in terms of brand aesthetic. And
actually, brown bag, right? It was a brown bag label.
Yeah, can everybody see this? And so anyway, it was quite non-committal in terms of aesthetic, and I was like reserving the right to change both the aesthetic and the name. Turns out the name really stuck, and it really resonated with people who weren't confused. And the aesthetic wasn't quite there, and so we did end up in our second vintage, which was 2018, released in 2019, going with like this sort of look. If you guys like peep our website, you can kind of see what the rest of the packaging looks like. And the name for this wine, ETA, really came out of just a lot of our names come from just stuff that I think about a lot, and also stuff that is either related to the wine or just comes up a lot in like our daily like banter. And
one thing, like harvest is really all about like scheduling and logistics. And so the very short text message, ETA question mark, because we're also driving quite often or like on the go quite often or in like remote areas where there's shitty cell service quite often. And so ETA question mark is just a text message that was sent like, you know, hundreds of times during harvest. And we were like, this has to become the name of wine. And the rosé is now bearing its name, and came with these little acid trippy sailboats that are going nowhere quickly. And yeah, that's kind of how the label design pulled together on this SKU.
Fantastic. And I remember when Alex first told me about Subject to Change and how it stuck. I said, you know, you're in good company, because that's how Per Se was named in New York City when they were talking about the French Laundry and Thomas Keller. They said, he's like, well, it's not going to be the French Laundry per se, it'll be something else, and Per Se stuck. So Subject to Change is in good company when it comes to naming companies that way.
That is definitely pretty solid. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I first met Alex is probably going back 8 years ago, outside the Ruby Wine Shop, and he comes riding up. He gets off of a motorcycle, so he's all leathered out with a helmet, hanging up. I get introduced to him, fellow Jersey boy. So we start talking. So the Jersey boys are in the house, and if you hear Alex doesn't sound like a Jersey boy to me. He sounds like a surfer from Southern California sometimes, and we're hanging out, and then he's drinking this wine, one of these wines. I don't even remember the wine, but he is just rattling off all these flavor notes and profiles, and he was blowing my mind with his wine knowledge. And I was like, dude, what do you do? It's like, well, I'm in wine, and I was like studied in France and everything. So I was like, this is someone I need to get to know. So we've been pretty good friends ever since. But I want you to share part of your story of how does a Jersey boy find himself in France and getting into wine?
Oh boy. If I have 3 more fucking glasses of wine, I might sound like I'm from Jersey, Chris. How did I get into wine? Well, I when I was a kid, I was always like very intrigued by restaurants. I used to like love going to restaurants and stuff, and I always wanted to work in the restaurant industry. And my family was like very against that, and so I ended up listening to them for some reason when I was in high school, and went to college in New York and studied finance, and it all seemed like not very fulfilling to me when I had like internships and jobs right out of college. And I was lucky enough to be exposed pretty heavily to European culture when I was a kid. My mom was in France when she was much younger, long before I was born. And so we used to travel back and forth to France a lot when I was a kid, and she spoke French, and we had a lot of family friends there, and sort of was just really fortunate to be exposed to the way that French people view food and beverage, and how it's sort of like a more natural and less precious part of their lives, and how like different flavors are so widely accepted, and just sort of how like casually beautiful the approach to food and beverages in European culture in general. And that's not to say that like all European people know a lot about food and wine. I think that's a very common misconception amongst Americans, that like just because somebody has like a suave French or Italian accent that they're like a food and wine guru, because that there's definitely tons of Europeans that eat and drink shitty food and wine, but it's more just like the approach and the way of life that really appealed to me. And I was fortunate to spend a year studying in college there, and some family friends were really well connected with some folks in the wine industry, and so I got to go visit a lot of really cool wineries and have some pretty mind-blowing experiences that would have been far outside of my reach, like from a resources perspective. Just got to try a lot of incredible wine and go on a lot of incredible like experiences, visiting wineries, sort of seeing under the curtain when I spent that year there, just because of some family friends. And I was just like enchanted. And I came back to college in New York and like I just like couldn't even stand what I was doing anymore, but sort of pursued, graduated, had a first finance job in New York, and just spent all my time like reading about, learning about, drinking wine. Tried to get a job in some wine shops, and had a brief like stint in cheese at one point when I was in college as well. And anyway, I was basically just like, I need a new career path because the sort of the corporate world's not so much working out for me. And I got my car, drove to California, was really interested in finding a job that like allowed me to spend more time outdoors, finding a job that allowed me to work with my hands, finding a job that allowed me to be more creative, all things that were never really things that I had any confidence doing, or very much experienced doing, but that I felt like really drawn to. And I got very lucky, moved out here when I was like 24, and ended up getting my first harvest internship with a family that was making very small amounts of wine in Sonoma Valley. They owned a vineyard. They all had like other careers and stuff. And so the reins were turned over to me at a very, very, very young and inexperienced age. And so I kind of got to learn every aspect of the business from the ground up, from wine production, viticulture, to like putting some accounting skills to work, and like general management, sales, stuff like that. And so yeah, I was there for 7 years and then left and launched this company in 2017.
Why did you make the decision to go into natural wine, the 0.0, as you mentioned, organically farmed, native yeast, unfined, unfiltered, no SO2 at bottling? What drew you to that as opposed to just a conventional method of making wine?
I mean, a conventional method of making wine was never even like really in my stratosphere. I think I've always been drawn to wine as like this sort of, I mean, it's going to sound kind of lame, but like there is like a very romantic, poetic kind of story about wine that just never comes through unless even if there's like phenomenal marketing behind it. If you look at marketing and then it's like kind of shows up empty when you pour yourself a glass, and the wine doesn't feel like alive and like it's actually telling the story that the marketing is like trying to persuade you to buy, then that fucking sucks. And also, I think that, yeah, conventional wine was never really even like in my wheelhouse, but I guess like if the question were to be narrowed down to like what made me choose like full 0.0 natural wine over what would be called like minimal intervention, a few things. One, the not sexy part of that answer is that like it's a point of differentiation in the marketplace, because around the time we were launching this company, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of new young winemakers working with similar varieties, making a similar style with similar branding aesthetics, similar price points. And what I thought was like blatantly missing was, obviously there's like very little 0.0 approach in California. I mean, you could basically like count the number of producers who work exclusively 0.0 on one hand in California. Secondly, it's honestly just the easiest answer is like, it's just the wines that I like to drink, and probably 90% of the wines that are in my own personal collection that I open on a daily basis are 0.0. I think it's more interesting, it's more risky, it's more like moving, you know, and there's definitely like hits and misses for everybody, for every producer in the 0.0 spectrum. I just think what goes overlooked for people who are like the anti 0.0, like the 0.0 people are dogmatic, and it's silly to just be exclusively 0.0. I think the response to that is like there's tons of misses when you're not 0.0 as well, and I think that's what's often overlooked. And so I just think it's like a more interesting, more unique, more compelling approach to making and consuming wine.
Yeah. So one of the things, just for everyone else's benefit, that when Alex is saying 0.0, what he's talking about is a style of wine that literally has nothing else added. They pick the grapes, they mash them, the yeast does its work, they put it in bottles, they cap it, and that's pretty much it. Some of the other wines that we've been having in this packet have some sulfur or maybe some other small type of manipulations in them. Usually just a little sulfur added, like it is in the case with Rock Cellars, the first one. But half of them are full 0.0, no sulfur added. It is nice to hear that it is that there is some business acumen and marketing decisions going into it as well. The other thing I like about it, though, is that with 0.0 wines, there is bottle variations. And then we have 15, 16 people on this call right now, or I've got 19 people called in right now. All right, so everyone's going to get a slight different bottle variation depending on temperature, how you stored it, where you are, and all these other things. So it goes really nicely with the name subject to change as well, because this wine itself, this bottle is subject to change. I don't know about y'all, but my fizziness is gone. That swirling, whatever, this wine changes as you drink it. 10 minutes in or 30 minutes into it after the bottle's open, this is a different tasting wine already, which is really cool.
Yeah, no doubt. And I guess one thing I'd say is like with any type of real wine, and I'm not like capping real wine at a certain amount of added sulfur, you know, is it 10 parts? Is it 20 parts? I don't know. I find that like kind of semantics. Like I'm not against the judicious use of sulfur in the cellar. But no matter what you do, as long as you're making real wine, there's always going to be bottle variation. Because if you're creating a living product and you create like 2,000 bottles of a wine and they go to all different places in the world, it's impossible that each one will taste exactly the same at a given moment. Which I actually would argue is another great reason to make 0.0 wine, because a lot of the risks are inherent one way or another. People say like, oh, there's so many bad no sulfur wines, and it's like, well, there's so many bad wines with sulfur in them as well. And so I think that, you know, we take like great care in the cellar to make sure that we're limiting bottle variation within like relatively tight lines, you know. So like nobody on this call, I hope, and if you do, please just holler at me, has a bad bottle of this wine.
So it's interesting. So one of the things that's interesting about this group is that at least half of this group are not, I'll just use quote unquote natty wine people. A lot of people are drinking natural wine for the first time in this case, or maybe they've had it a couple other times, particularly if I've brought them a bottle before. So Dominique has a question. So Dominique, I'm going to come to you with your question.
Oh, no, it's just a follow-up. You mentioned that, but I think you sort of answered it, that 0.0 wine is more risky. Why did you say that? Is that because of the variability indeed that you were referring to, or?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I just grabbed my dog. He was being bad. Yeah, so sulfur does basically two things. One is it acts as an antioxidant, and so it prevents wine from oxidizing as quickly as it might otherwise. And two is it's an antimicrobial, And so it kills microbes, in your wine. So anything that's living and active that could possibly produce byproducts that you don't like, it will either like mitigate or kill. And so that's why wineries use sulfur in general as an antioxidant and an antimicrobial. I'll let you know, Bubba.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dominique, what a lot of wine producers will do is, they have wine as a perishable product, and obviously it's harvested every year. And some of them will actually, it's a risk mitigating, right? They'll just pump up the wine with sulfites just to make sure it doesn't spoil or doesn't do anything. And it alters the flavor profile in a lot of cases. After you've been drinking natural wine for a while, you can usually taste what some people refer as spiked with sulfur at bottling. You can definitely know sometimes a sulfur wine versus not.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, so there's an amount of sulfur that one could add. Sulfur use is so complicated.
Used to what?
I get like a big pack of like dollar
All right, Jules, you're put you on mute.
Sulfur use is complex because how much sulfur you add and how effective it is also heavily dependent upon the pH of the wine. So the higher the pH, the less effective the same dose of sulfur will be. And this could become like, basically like a college class on this one topic. But, essentially you could hit a wine with 5 parts of sulfur, especially like a higher pH wine with 5 parts of sulfur. And a year later, it'll be like, unnoticeable. It'll probably be almost unnoticeable even right afterwards, a couple, maybe 6 months after bottling. But once you start, the more natural wine you drink with very low or no sulfur, to Chris's point, the more easily affected you are. And I think like the more noticeable small doses of sulfur even become. And it becomes like, it kind of just deadens the wine. Like it kind of just like kills the soul and the vibrancy, especially in like higher doses. And then all wines become this sort of like sterile, boring thing. And so sulfur is great if you're making like millions and millions of cases of wine, because you freeze the wine in time, and that bottle number 2 and bottle number 5 million are exactly the same because you've frozen it. But for us in this world, like that removes all the fun, basically.
Yeah. So a couple quick questions. One of them is, what's the name of your dog?
Louie.
Also, as a what kind of dog is it?
A standard poodle.
Standard poodle. Okay. Also, Jersey boy. Do you know Gary Vaynerchuk?
Yeah, I used to play basketball with him every day. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know.
Yeah.
Gary Vaynerchuk wishes he played basketball with me every day.
Yeah.
No, I don't know Gary Vaynerchuk, but I will say that I spent a lot of my early wine career watching Wine Library TV, and that was a huge source of knowledge for me, even though Gary Vaynerchuk and I probably don't have the same taste in wine.
Yeah. So, and I completely agree. Also, as Jersey boy, I was a fan of Wine Library TV from the get-go. I was watching it from, I think, like episode 20 when it first came out. I've actually met him a bunch of times because he used to have, earlier, I think, in his Wine Library career before he blew up and Forbes, he used to have meetups like we're planning on having here. So I've been at his events in New York City, but he's done a tremendous amount of things for wine, making it approachable, just in terms of talking about flavor profiles. But
yeah,
go ahead.
I mean, he was definitely really, the guy's been ahead of the game on like basically everything, which is why he's such an effective businessman. But I think that one thing he was really ahead of the game on was sort of like making wine descriptions and talking about wine something that's like more approachable to the like quote unquote common man. And yeah, talking about, I mean, he's obviously he's very funny. At least I think he's very funny, especially when he was on Wine Library and he was like a little more, I mean, I wouldn't say more relaxed because he's very high strung in general, but like, he was less established. And so I think he was more willing to, I mean, he always kind of says whatever he wants, but he was like very just like effusive and got so energized about wine. And I think that made, like, for somebody like me who I was like, oh, well, like, I can't afford to buy these like $80 bottles of wine to learn what they taste like. I was like, oh, I could watch this guy. It's hilarious. It's educational. It's informative. And it's like super approachable. And I think he was really ahead of the game on that, because now there's like tons and tons and tons of people who are doing the same exact thing, both in like journalism and like online reviews, etc.
Yeah, I also think one of the things that Gary did is he obviously encourages an entrepreneurial life. He definitely eschews people looking for authority. Like one of the people, you know, he often gets criticized for not being a certified som or whatever. He's like, why do I need that authority? I can tell you what my wine tastes like. So, and so I think one of the outcomes of that, or at least part of one of the correlations, is a lot of natural winemakers in California, or in America anyway, are fairly young. People who just said, I'm not going to wait 20 years working under somebody else to make my own wine. I'm just going to harvest some grapes and see what happens, as well as make funky labels. Like these type of labels probably wouldn't have been acceptable 10 years ago, or wouldn't have had the audience that they have now. So, so Alex, let's talk about this label a little. So who's your artist and where does the inspiration come from?
Just really quickly before we dive into that, I even think that wine didn't have the audience that it has now. You know, wine itself has become, partially because of natural wine and partially because of like the big natural wine movement becoming more ubiquitous like it is now. You know, guys like Gary Vaynerchuk early in the game, but now especially, you know, it's not just these types of labels. It's more just like these labels represent the fact that wine producers can kind of do and say what they want. And because there's such a broader audience for wine, like the people on this call don't fit one demographic and one archetype, whereas the wine consumer of yore was definitely like baby boomers who didn't start drinking wine until they had like made it. And it was like, you know, drinking wine, knowing about wine was sort of like a sign of success, and it was like the beverage that you drank when you had made it, and prior to that you were drinking like beer and cocktails. And now like you can spend $20, $25, which isn't chump change but is not like a crazy amount of money, and you can get a killer bottle of real wine. And that's awesome, and you can have access to figuring out where you'll get that more so than ever. And so I think that's like a pretty special thing about this period in wine and forward.
Yeah.
So sorry to derail the label conversation.
No, totally. Yeah. So while you talk about the label and the inspiration, if anybody has more questions, keep the chats coming, because I like where it's going.
Chris, I feel like you missed mine.
I was going to come back to it because, so I'm going to come back to it. So I'll come back to it now before the label. So Amelia's question is, why don't they label the bottle natural wine? Like, why is it so hard to find natural wine or know what's in the bottle?
Mm-hmm.
Amelia, this is a big can of worms.
I know.
That's why I stuck in it and I was coming back to it, Amelia. I did not forget you, but let's get into it. Let's open up that can of worms.
Do you already know the answer to this question, or are you asking for like the benefit of this conversation?
No, I honestly don't. But
Okay.
my mom, and I mean, I grew up with my dad making our wine, so we never bought wine. And then once my dad got older, and he's kind of stopped now, like my brother does, but it's not great. And he's not on the call, I can say that.
Self-awareness.
My mom won't drink wine unless she knows it's organic or like, natural. And so I go to the store and it's a nightmare trying to find natural wine. So I was looking at your label and it's like, it's kind of hard, not just your label, but just in general. So I was just curious.
Yeah. So this is just, it's amazing. You're absolutely right. It's amazing. This is as natty gets, but there's no way about looking at this label to know that.
Yeah. Big topic in the industry. Some people would call it a problem. Some people would call it a solution. I'm not sure I have the firmest stance on.
We lost can't hear you, Alex. Can't hear you. Can anyone else hear him, or is it just me? No, we cannot hear you, Alex. Nope. Okay, the AirPod went dead. So.
Well, I will say, just because we have a gap, that I kind of understand maybe where he's going, because maybe he's back.
Am I back?
You're back.
You're
yes.
back.
Cool. Is it hard to hear? Because I had to disconnect my headphones for some reason.
No, you're good now.
Okay. Yeah, so the people who would call it a problem would say, like, you want to be able to pick up a product, read the label, and know exactly what it is. And if one of the things that's most important in this industry right now is, like, is it natural and is it not natural, why would that not be apparent on the label as easily as, like, just specifically saying natural wine? So part of the issue is there's no agreed upon definition of natural wine. Some people would say that you're 0-0 or bust. Some people would say as long as you have organic viticulture and a judicious use of sulfur with no other additives, that's natural. Some people would say you can even lightly filter a wine and it'd be natural. And so there's no like governing body of natural wine. And so that's kind of what makes it a challenge, because there has to be full agreement and like a centralized authority on who's allowing you to write natural on your label. Same way there is with organic. Problem is, just like with organic, a lot of it is more like bureaucracy and bullshit and like process than actually adhering to like the core principles. And so you start to lose what makes it so important, or you might make it too hard to get this type of certification for like the small artisanal producers who would be deemed like the most important part of the maker network to actually obtain these certifications. So I think some intersection of all of those things has made it impossible for like one governing body to step in and say like, we are going to certify natural wineries this way or that. And two is that really there hasn't been like a huge audience for this for so long. And so it was sort of this like underground movement for such a long time until like, 10 years ago, it started hitting the scene much harder. 5 years ago, it like totally proliferated into the madness that it is now, where like people can't produce enough natural wine. They can't consume enough natural wine. They can't learn enough about natural wine. People who never cared about wine earlier are now into natural wine. It was like, who's certifying whether or not this is punk rock, And so that's kind of what it was. And so now I think there's more of a reason to want to certify it. I know that France made some effort. I'm sure Chris would want to like expound on this a little more. France made some effort to actually like make it happen. But the truth is like the core community would say like, this is not a necessity. It's a self-regulating market. People call out like bullshit where people are like masquerading as natural wineries when they're really not. The problem is the more it grows, the more need there is for some type of central certification, because consumers can't be left to their own devices to like spot bullshit, obviously, because if you're not an expert on something, how would you know? So that was kind of long-winded, but I guess the only other thing I'll say here is like a lot of producers, especially younger producers, are definitely like making labels that signal like this is natural wine because of the branding aesthetic. The problem with that becomes making this label just means you have to hire a designer, create a Pinterest board, show that designer what natural wine labels look like, and then you could make what we would call a spoofy wine, which is like code for bullshit, and just put this type of label on it, and consumers will assume that it's natural wine. And so, and then the flip side to that is like, there's wines like this. It's like, this doesn't look like this, but like this is organic grapes with no sulfur in it. And so it becomes this very challenging thing for consumers to understand without a certification. And so it's a very big topic. I'm sure.
To that point, Alex, I mean, do you guys have something in your shop that you use as your like sandbox to say this is natural wine or this is not? Or how would you classify things, Carrie?
Yeah, I think like the overall philosophy that we adopt is everything starts in the vineyard. It's either organic viticulture or we're not even having a conversation. So that's kind of the starting point. I'm sure there's people who would take issue with that and say that there's places in the world where it's so hard not to use synthetic fungicides, for example. I would just not really entertain that argument, but it's not invalid. But yeah, so organic viticulture is a starting point. In the winery, there is no addition that is acceptable other than sulfur.
Yeah. Alex, sorry, let me just interrupt. I think it's safer to say that the only wines you carry in the shop you're in Gemini now are natural wines.
Definitely.
Right. So what you've seen in the industry right now is it comes down to relationships and trust. And if you really want to know that you're getting natural wine, you have to go to a shop that you know that carries natural wine, or you need to look at distributors or import labels in the back that you know focus on natural wine, it's about the relationships and the process of how the goes from grapes to the table, to your glass. It really is. There's no other way to know right now, because to the point is, like when Alex said, oh, people call out BS. There's even fun hashtags on Instagram now where if it really is natural wine, our Italian friends have hashtagged it not a fugazi. So so people are like, it's a way of saying, hey, this is the real deal. This is how things are made. So if you want to go on Instagram and search not a fugazi, you're going to see some really cool images of natural wine. To the point is, we talked to Dan Marioni a couple of days ago, and they actually have a bottle that's called Fugazitron, which is a play on the not a fugazi name. So there's it's a small community. There's a lot of, internal banter, and it's like, when you know. The challenge is most people don't know, so it's the Kevin Bacon game. They need to know somebody who knows.
Yeah, and I think that like definitely relying on importers is great if you want to buy imported wine, because importers are your first like screen, right? But ultimately, you're just relying on one person's approach, right? So if you buy your wine at Gemini, you're relying on Gemini's approach. If you buy your wine at Ruby, you're relying on Ruby's approach.
Yeah.
If you buy your wine at Leporello's, you're relying on Leporello's approach. And there's tons of phenomenal vendors of wine who screen in their own way. And it's definitely important, like Chris said, you form relationships. You meet this person, you meet Chris, you buy your wine from Leporello's, you understand how Chris screens wine, and then you sort of get like opened up to this network of producers that Chris likes, and then you see like kind of what those people like to drink, and so yeah, then obviously you start formulating your own opinions, and that is definitely the easiest way to like find somebody to screen it for you, so you know like Leporello's has certified this wine as like passing their like his criteria or whatever. And it's the same thing with importers. Like the problem becomes then it's like some importers, like Louis Dresner, for example. Louis Dresner imports a lot of wines that are like some of the deepest cut natty wines on the planet, and like they're culty natty wines. And then they also import some wines that like I wouldn't say they're just not like of interest to probably me or like a lot of our peers, right? And so, but that is a great starting point. Importer.
That's one of the pieces of advice he said. A lot of articles will say look at the importer label, which is what I mentioned now, but it's not foolproof. We work with a lot of importers and distributors that carry both.
Yeah.
So Alex, where is the winery located?
The winery is located, I wish I was there. The winery is located in West County, Sonoma in Forestville. So that's between Sebastopol and Healdsburg. And the vast majority of our fruit comes from Mendocino County, which is a region with incredible, like rich viticultural history and an extremely high concentration of organic viticulture, but with more affordable land and grape prices for the types of wines that we want to make at the prices at which we want to get them to market.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been talking about, Alex, is when all this stuff is over and people can go outside, doing like a Leporello's meetup and bringing the group up in mass to go visit the winery in Forestville. You be down for that?
Yeah, please come. We have a large outdoor area, a barbecue, more wine than you could drink. So
yeah. It sounds like Maria is down to take her daughter up there for her 21st birthday. And Maria, what's your daughter's name? You're on mute.
No, it's not my daughter.
It's my daughter.
Oh, it's your daughter. Oh,
daughter.
It was the way it was written in the chat. My daughter, who's about to be 21, said this is the best wine she's ever tasted. Sounds like a great spot for her 21st birthday or right after that. So, and that's her in the background. So,
That's the wine, but I haven't tried many wines, so.
okay. Okay. See, number one. Hey, I grew up. I grew up with wine on the table too. I was drinking a couple of very well-known Italian brands since I've been 8 years old. So it's all good. But you turn 21 in June, this stuff will be over. Perfect timing to go up to first.
Are you guys in Napa?
No,
There's
Sonoma. Sonoma.
Sonoma. Okay.
Yeah. I also had the good fortune of having parents that allowed me to drink wine. But
I'm 20. My birthday's in June, so.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
At least your parents are serving you good wine.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Alex, so what was the wine that your family had growing up on the table?
Trash, man. Oh my God.
All right. Don't say the name now. We don't want to trash the label of that.
Yeah, I don't.
For me, it was good.
Corporations. I don't really care if I trash them on the internet.
Okay, go for it.
I mean, my parents used to drink like Blackstone Merlot and like have. Man,
we changed a lot of people's impressions about Merlot last night or a couple days ago with Sonoma Mountain.
Oh, it's not a knock on Merlot. It's a knock on Blackstone.
Yeah. But no, so if anybody, write in the chat, what was the wine? I'm curious about this for everybody on the call. What was the wine that your parents let you drink when you were underage at home? Do you know what that is? Okay, Ashley's jumping all over it right now. But the Sebastiani, yeah, nice. For me, it was actually it was a bottle of red, bottle of white. We were a Billy Joel kind of family. It was the Santa Margherita Pinot Grigio, classic New Jersey Italian, and the other one was the Rufino Chianti. And on Christmas and Easter, it was the Rufino Chianti Reserva Ducal, the gold label, the more expensive one, because it was especially.
Jules Colangela's answer.
Lucky.
Let's hear
Okay.
Jules, what did you drink?
Sonoda for that.
Speak up, Jules.
Jules Colangelo, what did you do? So Berenger, Dominique. What is La Dominique 1971? What is that?
Yeah, also wondering that.
Yes, so there is, it's a Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Classé, so it's a very good wine, I've been told. So my dad was really into wine. I grew up in the Netherlands. And so when I was born, you can guess which year, he bought like many, many cases of this wine. And then every year on my birthday, we would, you know, open one bottle and I got to sip the wine. And then the promise was that when I would leave the house, I would get whatever was left over. So I went to college. I was like, all right, Dad, come on, like, give me those wines. He's like, no. So it took many years. So finally at my wedding, we finished. So there's only 2 more bottles left of this particular wine in our collection. But yeah, it's a very good Saint-Emilion.
Awesome.
Okay. So you see the range. The range here is from like Franzia box wine to Saint-Emilion, La Dominique 1971. It's a pretty diverse crowd. A lot of box wine, Franzia, Baby Duck Sparkling. Dean, what is Baby Duck Sparkling? Ashley and Dean, so Ashley, what is Baby Duck Sparkling? I saw you type that in. Whatever people brought to the last party.
Will you type it?
It's Canadian. Ashley was going to sit there and type it. It's Canadian wine is what it is.
Yeah, it's a Canadian sparkling wine that is very cheap.
It's like Boone's Farm.
And ever since we were 14, my mom used to let us only at New Year's and Christmas have this tiny little sifter glass. It was like a shot of it during the toast.
Very, very good wine. Thank you.
Yeah, this is great.
Fantastic. All right. Are there any more questions for Alex?
We just had one comment more than a question, which is that when we opened this shipment of all of the 6 bottles, even though we should not judge a bottle based on its label, we were the most excited to drink this. So the labeling, the color, everything, top notch.
Thank you very much. It's been a labor of love.
Yeah.
I have to ask, has your business been impacted by COVID, up or down?
Our business is getting crushed by COVID, very far down for sure. Another full conversation, if not like another college course, could be taught on like the struggle that the wine industry has with direct consumer sales. And our winery is like 95% wholesale. And so we sell to distributors who then resell the wine to all of their clients in their market. And because all the restaurants in the country are or should be closed down, distributors aren't getting paid by the restaurants, which make up a huge portion of their clientele. So they then can't pay their bills back to their suppliers, which are wineries. And as a result of not being able to pay their bills from wine they've already taken and not being able to purchase new wine, we are getting demolished, to be quite frank. But there's been like a really nice uptick in direct consumer sales. We are definitely kind of learning the ropes of that pretty quickly and trying to put more resources into it. Something we should have been doing for a long time, but we already knew the wholesale game so well, and it was such a a clearer path to getting this company up and rolling, because the real issue with direct consumer is like, unless you get a ton of publicity or you have a lot of resources to sink into it, or you're already famous from something else, it's really hard to to sell, let's say, like 5,000 cases of wine a year direct consumer, right? Because if everybody buys a case, you need to have 5,000 consumers. Whereas for me to sell 5,000 cases of wine wholesale, I maybe need to manage only like 20 relationships with wholesalers throughout the world, and moving 5,000 cases is not that hard because those wholesalers have relationships with hundreds, if not thousands, of accounts of their own. And so that's why we went so heavy into wholesale initially, because it was the only thing we really knew how to do that well that would help us scale to the point where this would become like economically feasible for us. And never was there a time where I like thought that something like this would happen, obviously. And so DTC was always something that was sort of like, we'll get to it, like once we make it, we'll sort of like put some resources into that. And, again, this is like a whole conversation for another time, but yeah, the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry, therefore the wine industry, which relies so heavily on those things, are getting hit really hard. And our model is not set up for a time like this, certainly. But I also have to say that like there's been a huge outpouring of support. It can't like close the gap for us, but it's definitely like super helpful and super appreciated. And stuff like this, businesses like Leporello's, people like you guys who are like interested in an alternative form of wine tasting where we're hopping on our computers and all drinking the same wine, likely all over the country. I would assume there's people all over the place on this chat, although it looks like daylight in most places, so I assume most people are in California, is really fucking cool. So it's very interesting. It's very cool. It's very like kind of heartwarming, for lack of a better term. And so, yeah, I think there's a whole new world ahead, and maybe this will like affect the change that our side of the industry needed in the first place, because wholesale is so taxing, because it's like so low margin, that maybe this was like sort of a kick in the ass that we always needed to get rolling deeper into direct consumer, deeper into like working with online businesses and like newer age models of wine sales.
So if we did want to support you and buy directly from you, what is the best way to do that? I haven't looked at, you might have a website, I don't know.
Yeah, you can buy directly on our website. I mean, I would definitely encourage, like, if you came to me through Chris, definitely to buy wine through Leporello's. Chris has been a longtime friend and like mentor and supporter of what I've been doing from business, and just like we've been personal friends for a long time. And so I'm super happy for him and super proud of him for launching Leporello's. So anything you can do to support Leporello's, please do. If there's wines that he's not carrying, or there's not like the ability to purchase from him, you can buy directly on our website at subjecttochange.com. And you can get any of our wines there. If there's stuff you don't see that you're interested in, we have a bunch of like back vintages, library stuff, large formats, etc.
Cool.
That you can just email us about. But yeah, buying on our website is definitely the best way to support us, or buying, of course, like I said, through like retail partners who are stocking our wines, like Leporello's, would also be a great route.
We may have lost our host.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm just stepping in, probably Dominique and I, because we worked with him. But this is recording, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, where did he go? Maybe I'll text him. I was like, what's going on here?
Well, it might be, I mean, he lives in a remote area, so who knows, but just wanted to just say thanks to everyone, and I know there's a tasting tomorrow, and we're halfway through, and I want to say I've personally enjoyed like seeing all of you and hearing your stories. So see you tomorrow night, I guess.
Yeah, this has been very cool. This is my first internet tasting ever, and I was
really fun.
I just want to say I know I joined late. This is an awesome wine. It's an absolutely beautiful bouquet and body. Phenomenal. Yeah. Less than 2 cents, but yeah.
Thank you. I have drank over half of my own bottle so far, and I'll probably continue with the rest of it.
Well, let's do a cheers for Chris, and I'll take a quick picture for him. How's that? Cheers, everyone.
Let's kick it. Let's get it.
Atumani.
You want to do it? Let's get some clams. Let's do some linguine.
I honestly,
do clam.
Cheers, thank you.
I know. I literally have the perfect champagne for the linguine.
Yeah.
Can you grab some fennel? Fennel flour out.
Can I
now?
leave? No, because I'm co-host.
I mean, we have a bunch of fun.
Summertime to arrive there. Grab
Thanks,
wild
Chris.
fennel flour
Hi.
onto the property, and then I half cook the linguine here.
Yeah, right. And then you put it out on the
So you get the onion, everything's fresh. So you throw the butter, the garlic,
I
whatever you need.
Yeah.
Get it browned up.
Yeah.
Throw the wine.